Alright, today we're going to talk about embedding quotations. No, just kidding. Anyway, embedding quotations, making everything flow flawlessly and getting the most out of your evidence. Now, we know when we analyze literature and we use our Schaefer paragraph format, we have to start with our topic sentence and it's followed up by our all-important evidence. But a problem with evidence is making it really work for us so that it does what we want it to do in our paper. An important thing to remember is that the job of evidence is to prove your point, but it can't do that without a clear context. A quote on its own is often more confusing than helpful. In order to make sure your quote does what it wants to, you need to ask yourself 6 important questions about every quote you incorporate. These are often called our W questions. So who? Who's speaking? Is this a character? Is it the narrator? Perhaps this is just a description, but you need to clarify that for me when you introduce your quote. What? What's happening in the broader story? Where? Where is this taking place? What is the physical setting when this quote is said? When? When in the story is this happening? What happens before or what happens after your quotation? This is important not just to give me context about your quote, because you have to remember when you're looking at an AP passage, it may say the same thing in the beginning of the story, the middle of the story, and the end of the story. To get the full impact of your quotation, I need to know exactly where you're coming from. Why? Why is your quote being discussed or brought up? And how? How is it being said? What's the tone? This kind of question can become very important if you're examining something like irony or sarcasm. If I don't understand the tone, I won't understand that what's being said is ironic or sarcastic in some way just by looking at the quote on its own. So I take my 6 questions and I answer them about a quote. So let's look at an example from Night by Ellie Weiss. This quote says, "O God, Master of the universe, give me the strength never to do what Rabbi Elihu's son has done." Page 91. So who's saying this quote? Eliezer, my main character. What is this quote? It's a silent prayer. Where? Does Eliezer say this quote? While he's sitting in the snow. When? After his run from Camp Buna. Why? Why is Eliezer thinking this at this moment? He has just realized that a son who is on the run with him has left his father on purpose in order to preserve his own life. How? In spite of himself, since Eliezer no longer has faith in God. He doesn't want to pray, but at this particular moment he doesn't know what else to do. So now I have lots of questions that give me lots of context around my quote so that it's not just standing alone being confusing. I can't possibly fit all of that into one paragraph though, or even one sentence more importantly. So I'm going to pick 3. Make sure these 3 are important to the quote and what you're trying to prove. Remember, incorporating these 6 W questions is supposed to help my quote work harder. In this case, I'm choosing my who, why, and how, because I think that they help prove my idea about how Eliezer really feels about God. So when I incorporate my 3 W's in an introduction for my quote, here's what my quote ends up sounding like. Eliezer's continuing struggles with God are highlighted after the desperate run from Buna, when he realizes Rabbi Elihu's son has left his ailing father behind, and despite his waning faith, Eliezer is forced to pray for the strength never to do what Rabbi Elihu's son has done. Now notice, by incorporating my W questions before my quote and giving that strong introduction, I've also made a better transition than simply saying "for example." Instead, I've been able to say highlighting or highlighted. Now that doesn't mean that I can't use "for example" and incorporate my 3 W's to give a better quotation. It just means that a lot of times if you're using this information correctly, you won't have to use simple phrases like "for example." Your evidence will flow much more naturally. Now if I put this in an entire Schaefer paragraph, it ends up looking something like this. In Night, the main character, Eliezer, experiences a crisis of faith and loses a strong belief he had in God as a child. Eliezer's continuing struggles with God are highlighted after the desperate run from Buna when he realizes that Rabbi Elihu's son has left his ailing father behind. And despite his waning faith, Eliezer is forced to pray for the strength never to do what Rabbi Elihu's son has done. Faced with the utter loss of humanity, Eliezer still still falls back on God as the source of goodness and strength. He still wants to believe that God is capable of some kindness, even if it is only a small kindness. Later, when Eliezer abandons his father on his deathbed, Eliezer knows that his humanity and faith are lost forever. So you can see that my quote works hard, it includes a lot of details, and I'm still able to stick to my 5-sentence Schaefer paragraph. So remember, no quote stands on its own. Never start your paragraph with a quotation, and never introduce a quotation without considering at least 3 of your important W questions. Who, what, when, where, why, and how.